Rumours are starting to emerge that two teams went over the budget cap for the 2021 season, one of those teams being Red Bull. As last year was the first season with a budget cap, it's unclear what the penalties for these violations will be, but with Drivers' Championship points on the line, we discussed whether Max Verstappen could actually lose his World Championship. The other team that went over the budget cap of $145 million last season was Aston Martin, but according to reports, they aren't in as much trouble as Red Bull. You see, there's two ways teams can overspend. The first is known as a minor overspend, where a team has spent no more than 5% or around $7 million over budget. If they overspend by more than 5%, it's known as a material overspend, and the penalties for the two are different. It is currently thought that Aston Martin overspent by less than 5%, but Red Bull are thought to have overspent by significantly more. The reason the cost cap was introduced was to make the competition more fair, with every team having the same amount of money they can spend. In previous years, Mercedes was spending upwards of $400 million a season, and Toto Wolff said Mercedes had to make over 40 employees redundant to stay under the cost cap, meaning this overspend from Red Bull would have given them an advantage. So let's take a look at the possible penalties teams could get for spending over budget. For a minor overspend of less than 5%, a team could face a fine, a public reprimand, a deduction of Constructors or Drivers' World Championship points, forced to miss practice sessions, a reduction in team's cost cap for next season, or limitations on testing. For a material overspend of more than 5%, the team could face a deduction of Constructors' points, a financial penalty, suspension from races, exclusion from the championship, plus all the penalties for a minor overspend. As last season was the first we saw with a cost cap, we don't know how the FIA will come down on these two teams, but whichever penalties they decide to impose could have big consequences on how the teams will follow the cost cap going forward. Say Red Bull get a fine for a material overspend. Next season, Mercedes, who have plenty of money, might strategically overspend knowing the penalty is just a fine. However, if the penalty is much harsher, say testing limitations, race suspensions, or deduction of points, Mercedes will be much less inclined to overspend going forward. So this brings us on to which penalties the teams will get. And could Verstappen actually lose his World Championship? Looking at the possible penalties, Red Bull could be deducted Drivers' Championship points, which would take Verstappen's title away, depending on how many they deduct. However, I don't think the FIA would do so. I think Constructors' points or testing limitations are much more likely. In fact, I think however much a team overspends by, that amount should be deducted from the following season. So if Red Bull overspend by $15 million in 2021, their 2022 budget should be reduced by $15 million. So from $145 million to $130 million. I think that's the most fair solution here. I don't think drivers' points will be deducted here, because it's the teams doing the overspending. Look at Spygate in 2007. McLaren only had Constructors' points removed, but Hamilton and Alonso were allowed to keep their second and third places in the Drivers' Championship. So I don't think Verstappen is at risk of losing his 2021 World Championship, but other penalties are definitely on the cards.